This is Barry Zalma speaking for Claim School Incorporated's Zalma on Insurance blog. Today I'd like to talk about health insurance fraud and how some doctors have forgotten their oath to first do no harm. This video is entitled 360 Months in Federal Prison is Not Enough, where in the United States of America versus Patrick Emeka Ifediba and Ngozi Justina Ozuligbo in August 25, 2022 decision of the United States Court of Appeal for the 11th Circuit. The defendants appealed their convictions for healthcare fraud and related crimes. Ifediba, a physician, operated a clinic called CCMC and employed Ozuligbo, a licensed practical nurse there. They were convicted of acting as a pill mill and doubling as an insurance fraud scheme. The evidence at trial showed that CCMC prescribed large quantities of opioids to patients who had no medical need for them and ran an allergy testing and treatment scheme in which it required insured patients to undergo allergy testing and prescribe them medication despite their negative allergy tests. The clinic billed Medicare and private insurers for the tests and treatments. Ifediba and Ozuligbo were indicted on substantive counts of healthcare fraud, conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud, money laundering of the clinic's unlawful proceedings, and conspiracy to commit that crime. Ifediba was indicted for unlawfully distributing controlled substances for no legitimate medical purpose and for operating CCMC as a pill mill to distribute the controlled substances to patients who had no medical need for them. After a 3-week trial featuring testimony by CCMC patients, medical experts, and law enforcement officials, the jury convicted Ifediba and Ozuligbo on all counts. The court sentenced Ifediba to 360 months in prison, that's like 12 years, and Ozuligbo to 36 months, 3 years. CCMC operated as a pill mill and required insurance patients to undergo allergy testing and treatment, which had obviously no relationship to the pills they really wanted to get high. Ifediba and his wife, Uchenna Ifediba, also a physician, were the only physicians at CCMC. Neither Ifediba nor his wife specialized in pain management medicine, but they wrote many prescriptions for controlled substances, opioids. CCMC attracted patients who were willing to wait over 3 hours in a dirty, crowded waiting room to receive prescriptions for controlled substances. Besides its opioid distribution, CCMC wrote patients who had insurance into an allergy fraud scheme. The scheme was a simple one. Every insured patient who came to CCMC had to fill out a questionnaire on allergy symptoms before seeing the doctor. No matter the patient's answers, an allergy technician performed a skin prick allergy test on the patient. Regardless of whether the test results were positive or negative, Ifediba prescribed immunotherapy to treat allergies and directed the technicians to order the medication. Other patients also failed to receive the immunotherapy treatment their insurers paid for. Insurer Blue Cross Blue Shield of Alabama noticed the unusually high volume of the allergy-related claims coming from CCMC and announced that it would audit the clinic. In preparation for the audit, Ifediba told clinic staff including Ozuligbo, to change plaintiff's records, turning negative allergy test results to positive and making allergy symptoms on the patient questionnaire. A grand jury indicted Ifediba and Ozuligbo, charging them with multiple counts of unlawfully distributing controlled substances outside the course of professional practice and for no legitimate medical purpose. They were also indicted for conspiracy to distribute the controlled substances. All of these charges concern the prescribing of pain management substances. The indictment also charged Ifediba, Ozuligbo, Ozuligbo, and EBO with conspiracy to commit health care fraud through the allergy fraud scheme and substantive counts of health care fraud based on the records of specific patients. It further charged that Ifediba, Ozuligbo, and Ozuligbo laundered the proceeds of the illegal scheme. Ozuligbo, who had suffered a severe stroke, was dismissed from the case as incompetent. EBO pled guilty to one count of conspiracy to commit health care fraud and agreed to testify against Ifediba and Ozuligbo. The jury heard evidence of the health care fraud, including the government's medical expert, Dr. Jim Christensen, who told the jury that it was absolutely not appropriate to test patients for allergies just because their health insurance would pay for the test. The jury convicted, and the court sentenced the defendants. There were guilty verdicts for Ifediba and Ozuligbo. The jury convicted Ozuligbo of conspiracy to commit health care fraud and substantive health care fraud. Ifediba and Ozuligbo were also found guilty of money laundering the proceeds of the illegal allergy scheme and conspiring to commit that crime. The court sentenced Ifediba to 360 months in prison and Ozuligbo to 36 months. The 11th Circuit found sufficient evidence supported the convictions, noting that an appellate court must affirm a conviction unless there is no reasonable construction of the evidence for which the jury could have found the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The jury convicted Ifediba on 10 counts of substantive health care fraud. To be convicted in a health care fraud scheme, the defendant must be shown to have known that the claims submitted were, in fact, false. For each of the counts, Ifediba challenges patient files and billing records demonstrated that he or his conspirator, Ozuligbo, ordered treatment knowing that it was medically unnecessary. Although the patients did not need what he prescribed, he nevertheless made fraudulent representations to the insurers that the patients needed allergy treatment. Testimonial evidence confirmed that Ifediba likely knew the treatment was unnecessary, but billed the insurers anyway. The government's medical expert, Dr. Jim Christensen, testified that it was inappropriate to prescribe immunotherapy to someone who tested negative for allergies. The testimony of fraud investigators for the insurers confirmed that CCMC submitted allergy-related claims for these patients. Further testimony showed that Ifediba personally signed all the bills charging Medicare and private insurers for the medically unnecessary treatment, thereby defrauding them through false claims. The paper trail and testimony illustrating Ifediba's fraudulent representations were enough for a jury. Live testimony from patients, while helpful, is not required. As a result, the court affirmed the jury's verdict on the 4 counts of health care fraud. There was also sufficient evidence that supported Ozuligbo's conviction for conspiracy to commit health care fraud. The court noted that to sustain a conviction for conspiracy to commit health care fraud in violation of 18 U.S.C. sections 1347 and 1349, the government must establish beyond a reasonable doubt: 1, a conspiracy existed to commit health care fraud; 2, the defendant knew of the conspiracy; and 3, the defendant knowingly and voluntarily joined it. Because the crime of conspiracy is predominantly mental in composition, the government may prove these elements by circumstantial evidence and inferences therefrom. The government need not prove that the defendant knew all the details of the conspiracy. It need only prove that the defendant knew of the essential nature of the conspiracy. There was more than sufficient evidence to demonstrate that CCMC defrauded insurers through an allergy fraud scheme. Patient medical records illustrated that Ozuligbo knew of the conspiracy to provide immunotherapy treatment to patients who had tested negative for allergies. Ozuligbo's conversation with Special Agent Bullock supported an inference that she knew about the nature of the conspiracy and participated in it. Bullock arranged to meet Ozuligbo at her house for an interview, and standing in her driveway, she told Bullock that she performed allergy tests and provided immunotherapy at CCMC when she used to work there. She told him that CCMC only did allergy testing and immunotherapy for patients with insurance because it was expensive and cash-paying patients wouldn't pay for it. On the verge of tears, she told him, "I left to get away from that craziness and all the crazy patients, and now I work for peanuts." From this evidence, the jury readily could have found that Ozuligbo knowingly participated in the conspiracy to bill for medical services that were not actually medically necessary or delivered to the patients. Ifediba's sentence also was found by the 11th Circuit to be procedurally reasonable. The court noted that the trial evidence illustrating that CCMC supplied controlled substances to people who had no medical need for them, and that evidence also demonstrated that Uchenna wrote her share of bad prescriptions. CCMC provided an exponentially higher amount of prescriptions than other clinics of its size, and the clinic likely engaged in unlawful drug distribution before and after the conspiracy period. The government did not have to prove that each prescription was unlawful because the trial evidence showed that the clinic was in fact a pill mill that did not serve a legitimate medical purpose. Abundant evidence showed that the defendant was aware of its illegitimacy. The district court was therefore affirmed by the 11th Circuit on all grounds. In my opinion, health insurance fraud, like that perpetrated by the defendants, has caused the cost of health care for honest, ill, or injured people, and needs to be stopped. When the fraud is coupled with distribution of controlled substances to drug addicts and others who had no medical reason for the drugs, the physicians were violating their oath to first do no harm. The sentences were, considering the harm done to the public, to their patients, to insurers, and the government health care plans, were kind. And when they get out of jail, the defendants will probably live well off the fruits of their crime unless those fruits are seized by the U.S. government. This video was adapted from my blog, Zelma on Insurance, which is available free to anyone who goes to zelma.com/blog and subscribes. You can also subscribe and receive the same blog postings at substack.com and at my community at locals.com. If you found this video to be interesting or useful, please refer it to your friends and colleagues so that they can also subscribe. Thank you for your attention.